Hello everybody, this is going to be the skills and drills section of the NPDA 2023 mini-series. I am Joshua Smith and I'll be talking about content. There's a couple of things that are pretty important whenever talking about content. They're going to be file writing and reading the news/history. I'll talk about file writing first. The biggest thing with file writing is don't just be a consumer, be a producer. Don't just use the files that were given to you. You need to be writing new files throughout the season so that you can develop new strategies that you know more about than everyone else. If you are just using strategies that have been given to you, then you're never going to truly develop them because they never have your own personal touch. Writing files and generating your own arguments is the best way to get good at debating these arguments and picking apart the different mechanics of each individual argument so that you know how things like on a critique, for example, how the framework functions, how the link level functions, how the impact level functions, and how the alternative level functions, because each of them function differently given the different argument, and you need to know the specific mechanics of each specific argument. The next thing is reading. This is the most important thing. You need to know history regardless of the style of debate that you're going to be doing, whether you're debating case or policy or counterclaims disadvantages. You need to know history so that you can explain the historical mechanisms and what has happened in the past so that you can predict things in the future. Reading and knowing things about the world is the best way to generate warrants, truly and honestly, especially in an uncarded event. I have a couple personally of daily newsletters that detail out things like domestic and international politics so that I can kind of get an idea of, if I'm going to a tournament this weekend, what is likely to be debated. Next, you need to be reading about things and encourage other teammates and kind of involve them in the process of reading things. If you read a section of a book, then you need to encourage other people to read it, or if you read a really interesting news article, you can encourage other people on your team to read it. That's probably all I have for skills. I'm going to be passing it over to Arjun for mechanics.
Hi, I'm Arjun from Berkeley, and I'm here to talk to you about mechanics. So when I think about mechanics, I think of three things, stolen from Proteus, Paul behind the camera. First is speed drills, second is flowing, and lastly is prep. And when you master all three of those, you have a really solid foundation to start. So let's start with speed drills. When people think about speed drills, they think about talking fast, but oftentimes the most important thing is talking clear. And that's why this first drill, the pen drill, is really important. When you start the pen drill, you're gonna put a pen in your mouth, like if I were to have a pen, I'd demonstrate, but like this, essentially. And then you want to over-enunciate. Try to enunciate as many words as possible. And once you get enunciation down, you can try to talk faster and faster. That drill helps you be really, really clear. Once you master clarity, you can then move on to talking as fast as you can. And one of the things that's important with talking fast is that you detach yourself sort of from what you're saying specifically. Instead, you want to focus on just getting words out. And once you master clarity, you can go on to doing that. Two drills that I find really helpful are firstly, inserting filler words. My preferable one is watermelon. So for example, I'd say, hello, watermelon, my watermelon name, watermelon, for example, like that. Another good one is saying your file backwards. So that helps you detach yourself from the meaning of the file itself and rather just helps you get words out. Speed drills are important, but so is flowing, and some might say flowing is one of the most important things in debate, so mastering flowing is also really, really important. For flowing, there are lots of different things you can try. For example, I flow on my laptop, but back when I first started Parli, I used to flow on paper. One of the things I recommend is just trying everything you can out in practice. For example, maybe you listen to a round on a debate video site and you float out on paper and you try to float again on your spreadsheet, or you find another method that works for you, but just try a variety of things. Perhaps you listen to the same round over and over again and you try to see what helps you capture the most information in the most meaningful way. Really with flowing, the most important thing is just practicing over and over again. The more you can do it, the better you'll get. And understanding how and where to put arguments, for example, how you like organization, and what acronyms you can use. And that's another good helpful tip. When you're first starting out, try to come up with acronyms for words so it helps you sort of write things down faster. For example, framework in the K can be compressed to just FW, or politics can be PTX. Those things can help you write more things down, and it can also make your flow a lot more clearer. So yeah, flow as much as you can, and try to come up with ways to condense your flow down to things that work for you. Lastly is prep. Prep is important because people think debate's just all about debating, but prep is the thing that builds up your debate. There are a couple prep drills that I enjoy. Firstly, in 20 minutes of prep, try to generate as much as you can. So perhaps you can pull out a topic from perhaps an old tournament you went to, and try to just come up with as many arguments as you can in 20 minutes. That can help you just with argument generation, and it's really helpful to come up with different and unique things you can think about and how they relate back to the resolution. Once you sort of build the foundation of coming up with as much as you can, it could be helpful to sort of think about flowing as the opposite of prep as the opposite of academic research. As opposed to coming up with arguments second and finding warrants first, you want to come up with arguments first and find warrants second. So start off with quote-unquote IamRight.com, and then from there sort of fill in your arguments the second time around. So fill in your warrants again. And that can be helpful in just generating and going extra mile in research. And lastly, one of the most helpful and fun drills you can do if you have teammates who are willing to debate you is have them prep out a shell for 30 minutes, and then you go in and debate them completely cold with no prep. That can help you generate arguments on the fly, and it can help you become a lot more confident in your case positions. So with that, I'll pass it off to Alex to talk about strategy.
Hi, I'm Alex, formerly of University of Oregon. I am going to talk about strategy. And by strategy, I don't mean the overall kind of year-long strategy or strategy in terms of like competing over multiple tournaments. I mean in-round strategy. And as far as in-round strategy, there's a few ways you can take this, but these drills mostly rely on doing redos, in particular taking rounds that you've recorded or rounds that maybe somebody else has recorded and re-giving speeches. And re-giving speeches is incredibly important because you get the background of having those speeches or experiencing the speeches already. So the first redo drill is going to just be simply doing redos, taking an LOC or an MG or an MO and simply re-giving that speech over and over and over again to refine the collapse that you went for, to refine the arguments you went for. Maybe your warrant structure was a little bit messy and round, and you can clean those things up by giving those redos over and over again. And this is always going to improve skills, not just in the collapse or in whatever skills you're trying to drill, but also just make you more comfortable giving that speech. So not only is it retroactively like thinking about the rounds and how you can improve on them, but also looking towards the future and thinking, oh, this is how I would do this in the future. Other drills is if you have a partner or somebody around, they can also run cheater drills. Cheater drills are drills where somebody or your coach or your partner, somebody else on your team will be able to answer an argument for twice as long, 3 times as long. They give a 15-minute PMC, they give a 15-minute LOC, and in giving those speeches, you have to answer them, or rather, in answering those speeches in a standard amount of time or even a reduced amount of time, then that will force you to think about what is strategic, what do I actually have to answer, what are the most important arguments to go for. And this isn't necessarily a redo, but it can be a redo in when we get to time reduction drills. But as far as cheater drills, this is important in figuring out A, what's the most optimal way to answer specific arguments in a short amount of time, and B, like, how do I do this in terms of like just sitting down and mechanically doing it? Because you can think about how do you actually do this a lot. That's the replaying arguments in the shower thing. But as far as actually mechanically doing it, that's where the cheater drill comes into play. There are other drills, collapsing drills, specifically taking arguments that you did not collapse to in a round in the MO or the PMR and collapsing to other arguments. And this kind of will build up your confidence, especially if you're a debater who likes to go for one thing a lot. If you can, step outside your wheelhouse, go for the theory sheet that you didn't go for, or go for the case turn that you didn't go for. It's always important to be able to have options in the collapse, and these drills, specifically doing redos where you make a different decision, a different overall strategic decision than you did in the round is useful. And then finally, going for one thing as opposed to like going for multiple things. So let's say there's, this is a variant of the collapse drill, but it's like a more specific kind of collapse drill. Let's say it's a case turn or not a full position, as opposed to like going for, non-unique plus the case turn plus like no impact. As like an overall strategy, you spend 8 minutes going just on the case turn, and then you take that, you impact weigh, right? You go through and you say, look, this case turn outweighs all their impacts here, 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 and here, and that then allows you to explode through, most often like the MO. That's those kinds of rounds are the ones that you're going to be on the negative, but exploding out in the collapse this is how you get through those kinds of arguments. The other thing I would say is kind of the converse of the cheater drill is the time stressed version of that, where instead of having somebody like read a whole new argument for 15 minutes, you take an existing speech and you give shorter and shorter redos, right? Instead of giving an MO in 8 minutes, you give an MO in 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, right? And get as short of an MO as you can to figure out what is the correct collapse, how do you actually execute it, and what are the arguments that you need on it. So those are a bunch of different ways you can execute redos or execute different strategic drills that I think might help you in your next round. I will pass it off to Paul for oration.
Hello everyone, I'm here to talk to you about oration, which I would say is one of the more forgotten skills in technical debate formats, right? Because everyone wants to be the fastest debater or the one who can explain theory or whatever the best, but the reality is we are speaking to people, we don't have robots in the back of the room, and so quite frequently how we speak to them makes a huge difference. And so before we actually get specifically into any kind of drill, the number one thing, the biggest piece of advice I think I could give anyone is that whether you are in a round, whether you are doing a practice, whether you are doing a drill, you need to have an audience in mind. The name of the game in debate is audience adaptation, and what oration means to me is completely different than what it might mean to Alex or Alan Fishman or any other number of judges. We don't get to pick our judges at the vast majority of tournaments in any meaningful way, which means knowing what is good to your judge should structure and inform how you talk to them. But as far as what can you actually do outside of just having someone in mind? Number one thing, and I think everyone's gonna hate to hear it, you just have to record yourself. I am astounded by the number of my students who hate to hear their voice, who refuse to watch recordings of themselves speaking, and more importantly, who the second I do show them a recording, instantly become self-aware, like they're some kind of AI or robot. They're aware that they're saying like or so, or that they're just not getting to arguments, that they're lacking clarity, that they sound super mean, that they sound too slow sometimes even. And being able to look at those things and reflect is key to being able to iterate, because if you don't have a point of reference, you can't have a direction you're heading towards. It's like a uniqueness question. The second thing that I would say is I think the overview is essentially where most oration occurs in technical debate formats, right? Odds are, if you're just being very speechy and persuasive, you're not going to do that great unless you're like nationally elite at doing that kind of thing. And if you were, you'd probably be doing speech and not debate. So my advice to you is finding places in the debate where you get to be the best speaker and where that can help you win ballots is really important. And for me, this comes down to the concept of sort of marshaling ethos into the debate. There's a lot of times where if both teams, and obviously there's 4 people in a parliamentary debate, if 3 people have just been blitzing through the debate, there's been very little pen time for the judge, there's been very little consideration, an overview at the top of the MO, or a really clean LOR overview, or even a PMR overview, if that's when it occurs, can almost win you the round because the judge is gasping for air. They are hoping someone's gonna finally slow down and explain things. And so being able to write overviews is incredibly important. And I think this is a drill in and of itself. You could write 10 different overviews for the 10 different ways you would collapse to a position. And when I think of overviews, I generally tell students, you need to very clearly be saying, here is what we are winning on, here is the impact associated with that and why that is a win condition or a game winner for us, and most likely, if you can do this, some sort of preemption of what you think is to come from the opponent. What has the other person said or what you expect them to say in the future? And overviews are really great because there may be 20, 30 seconds for a really long overview, which means you could practice 50 overviews in like an hour if you really wanted to. So it's a very iterative process that's super important. But maybe the most specific and actionable thing that one of my coaches told me, Stephen Farias, was to start doing what he called SSSGs. And this is a concept that he borrowed from his time at Southern Illinois University. And when I was a debater at Pacific initially, I was just like, hey, I came from a community college and everyone here is better than me, but I can get really fast. And even though I don't understand stuff, that's gonna make a huge difference and I'll be the best. But what Steve made me start doing was on every single one of my flow papers, on the back side of it, I had to, in big letters, write SSSG. And if you're wondering what that means, it stands for stop, slow, stop, go. And what I mean by that is, obviously in these debates, people tend to be going fast, they are spreading, and a lot of stuff can get lost in the mix. But when you get to something that's really important, that is integral to your strategy, what you want to do is completely stop speaking, slowly say what matters the most, pause again, and then get back on your horse and start spreading. And if you're wondering why is that the case, The way this is generally going to look is your judges in the back of the room flowing as fast as they possibly can, and they're just getting whatever they can, they're being a little robot. And when someone stops speaking, the natural reaction of that judge is to stop typing, to stop staring at their laptop, and instead to look up at the competitor. And if in that moment you hit them with something really, really important in the debate, it's definitely going on the flow. It's definitely being internalized. And what I think of SSSGs as is basically an insurance policy against the 1JR. And what I mean by that is, if you have an SSSG in your speech, it's going to be really hard for the judge to not mention the relevancy of that argument in their decision. And that means you can feel comfortable knowing that, look, maybe I made the wrong choice, maybe I emphasized the wrong argument, but I know for a fact this was evaluated. And so if you're correct, most of the time that's going to end up resulting in a win for you. And so we didn't want this video to be too long. We want it to be very accessible and consumable for you folks. I hope you appreciate all the effort that these competitors and coaches put in for you and enjoy the NPTE lecture series in general. Thanks so much.